everyone, and welcome to Real Solutions, a podcast series on policies for a future where everyone belongs. This is a podcast being hosted by the Othering and Belonging Institute, where we get together with leaders from across the country to uplift and insist on bold policy solutions that would move the country towards belonging and well-being for all people.
There are a lot of false solutions being peddled these days. Your rent is too high, so the government should deport immigrants. Your wages aren't enough, then billionaires should get lower taxes. You're worried about your kid's future, then trans kids should lose their rights. These are real problems, but false solutions. And real problems deserve real solutions. So that's what we're here to talk about.
And so you may be wondering, what is the real solution we are proposing today? And so today we're talking about baby bonds, a policy that would dramatically improve people's economic well-being by making sure that young adults have some wealth to invest in their education, a business, or a home. Over 13 million Americans have zero or negative wealth, and vast racial inequities in wealth persist. Baby bonds are publicly funded trust accounts established at birth for children, particularly those from low-wealth families. Upon reaching adulthood, beneficiaries can use the fund for purposes such as education, homeownership, or entrepreneurship. Baby bonds help ensure that all families have a nest egg that can be used for investing in what's needed for a good life. This policy aims to disrupt the cycle of generational poverty and equitably create economic stability for all.
We're talking to two leaders who have been deeply involved in bringing baby bonds programs to life. David Radcliffe grew up in a small factory town in the Appalachian foothills of Western Pennsylvania, and today he lives with his family in Connecticut. Professionally, David is the state and local policy director with the New Schools Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy. His previous work experience includes policy director for the Office of the Connecticut State Treasurer, where he championed implementation of the first in the country Baby Bonds Wealth Building Initiative. He was also a policy analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and a grassroots community organizer. He has a strong passion for working with people to build places and economies where everyone can lead lives that are fulfilling, prosperous, and productive.
And second, we have Ahmed Kanduri, the Director of Programs at the Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund, where he leads efforts to narrow wealth inequality in Georgia, including through GRO's Baby Bonds Pilot Program and GRO's policy work. Ahmed brings over a decade of experience advancing economic opportunity. He helped direct over $50 million to expand economic opportunities at LISC Atlanta, design job training programs for the city of Atlanta, and advise federal agencies on system change as a management consultant at Deloitte. So I hope you enjoy this episode on baby bonds, and make sure you stick around for the rest of the series. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Real Solutions podcast, a podcast on policies for a future where everyone belongs. This episode is both exciting and also I'm going to be a little bit like, what happened? Baby bonds is not a topic that I know, but I'm an expert at, but I'm excited for the conversation. And again, thank you for joining us throughout the series. My name is Jose Richard Aviles. I'm one of your hosts. And I'm going to turn it over to our other host, Eli, who can do a little bit more of an intro of today's episode.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Hi, everyone. This is exciting. I was talking to my daughter who's 12 this morning. She said, what are you guys going to talk about? And I said, baby bonds. She said, what's that? I said, well, that's when anybody who's born, when you're born, the government creates an account. And then when you become a grown up, then they give you some money that you can use for college or for buying a house or starting a business. She was like, okay, so you can't just go shopping? No, you can't just go shopping. And she said, well, am I going to get one of those? I was like, well, not yet. We don't have them here yet for everybody. But it's so exciting that they are happening. They in multiple states. There's baby bonds programs here in California. There's a program, a baby bonds program for foster youth and kids who lost their parents to COVID. So it's happening. And 10 years ago, it was just an idea. And so I'm so excited to talk with Emmett and David about the work that y'all are doing and how this idea came about and how it's grown and what the promise is. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being in this conversation with us.
Let's dive in. I love the fact that you already were sharing the. I loved Alicia's response because I feel like that's exactly what my nephew would say. He's only 6, so has no idea. But I feel like if I told him something about a baby bond, what I'm finding out is that he thinks I'm the baby bond, like I'm the one with the indispensable money, and I'm like, child, no. But let's jump into it. David, I'm curious to hear, before we get into sort of the granular details of baby bonds, what are they? How do they impact us? Let's talk a little bit about some of the conditions that have allowed us to even arrive to this place. So when we're talking about baby bonds, I think it's first important that we answer, what is the affordability crisis? And what does it say about the purpose of the economy and the role of the government in it? That is a big question to start off with, but that's what we like to do at this podcast, ask big questions.
Yeah, let's get right to it. And thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation. The affordability crisis is the widening gap between what people earn and what it costs to cover essentials like healthcare, education, childcare. And for some people, this has always been a crisis. So there are lots of us who are not fully participating in our economy because of the lack of resources, because of the lack of wealth. And even full-time workers in these days are increasingly struggling to afford a stable, dignified life. And we've heard stories, like, just to bring it to even more color, that in these times, since COVID, that food pantries are still very active. In fact, have not declined in terms of folks who come in the front door because of lack of food security. Diaper banks are seeing lines out the door for people who can't afford that really basic human need. So the affordability crisis affects all of us, some certainly more than others. And to your question about the role of government in this space, well, the economy clearly is rewarding wealth over work and prioritizing profit over people's well-being. And you don't have to look any farther than watching the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is the so-called measure of economic well-being in our country. And we are reaching all-time highs of that measure. And you think that doesn't make sense because I'm struggling, or people I know and love are struggling. How is it that corporations are making these bonkers profits while folks are having to go to food pantries and diaper banks? So it challenges this notion that the purpose of an economy is about economic growth, when instead it should be about ensuring us, regular folks, are leading lives that are independent, self-directed, prosperous, and hopeful. And so there's a gap between the way the economy is operating and the way we want it to be. And that's where solutions like baby bonds can come into play.
Thanks, David. And so to build on that, let's talk about wealth. And sometimes wealth is kind of a stigmatized conversation, so we want to just bring it out in the open and ask you, Amit, to how do you define wealth? What does it mean in people's lives to either have wealth or not?
Yeah, you're keeping it coming with the big questions. This is great. Wealth means a lot of things. I mean, quite simply, some people view it as sort of the dollars and cents of it all, like your net worth, assets minus liabilities, right? But expanding on that, we think in order to build wealth, there's a pretty simple equation. I mean, you need to be able to meet your basic needs today, and then you also need to have a capital foundation for wealth building. You have to be able to be financially stable. So that's a product of today's income, the money you make today from your paycheck. That allows you to put some dollars away. It also allows you to maybe have some breathing room to plan for the future. And in addition to that, you need a large amount of money set aside for asset building. And for many people in this country, that is sort of handed down generation to generation. So it's a product of yesterday's wealth. So simply, wealth is really just a product of today's income and yesterday's wealth. But more broadly, wealth is important because of what it enables. It has certain enabling conditions. It expands people's choices. It provides agency. It allows people to shape their lives rather than just react to hardships. We talk with young people all the time as we're building out our programs. And, one of them shared that they hope to become a homeowner. And for her, it was not just about, how owning a home might do for her wealth trajectory. She viewed a home as sort of a stable place for her and her family where nobody could tell them what to do. And so for this young person, homeownership was really more than just an asset. It was stability and autonomy. And so in this way, that's a long way of saying in this way, we think that wealth, it's not just about the dollars and cents. It really does enable freedom. It enables agency. As David was sharing earlier, it does enable folks to live self-directed, prosperous lives.
I guess as you're both are talking, what I'm hearing you say is that both the building of wealth, or even having access or the tools to build wealth, then in some ways is related to the affordability crisis, right? Because you can't necessarily participate in a process if you don't have the tools to navigate and play in the game. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more. And you already started talking about this, but in terms of affordability and the lack of wealth building, who is hit the hardest with these problems, and how does this harm ripple out from like the personal practice to more of like the institutional side?
So, you can imagine, think about people you know or love who are struggling now. So, those without wealth, it's a lot of us. So, it particularly includes those who are low income naturally, who maybe are working but aren't able to save. There's certainly young people who are growing up without the benefit of an inheritance or trust fund. Those are folks who are in an economically precarious situation. Certainly communities of color, folks who have been historically marginalized through generations of policy choices and systematic exclusion are at risk. And single moms who experience both wage and wealth gaps. So that's a starter list. And it's as diverse as we are in this country. And when you think about it, that this spreads outwards. So it's not just an individual harm, but it affects families, larger networks and relationships who we know and love, larger economies, local, state, and federal, lose the investment that can be brought by families who are otherwise engaged in the system. Public systems face higher economic costs, and workplaces suffer from instability. And then this inequality, it compounds over generations, right? So children who are born into lesser resource families inherit not assets that can provide that economic stability, but inherit insecurity. And poverty is very sticky. So both folks born into poverty tend to stay there and then pass that on to the next generation.
100%. I'm like, because this is a podcast where we're talking about lived experience. Let me be real and on the record, I'm one of those kids. I was born in a working class poor family, and even like the 2 master's degree, I got more debt than I have more wealth now. But I think to your point, right, that I jokingly say that I wish I was 34 in the 90s. I look at Carrie Bradshaw's in Sex and the City. I want a rent control apartment for $750. Like, what the hell? The discourse around the wealth gap is only limited to behavioral changes, right? But I think there's also a lot of structural conditions that have continued to trap us or continue to leave us in a sort of like the same where the gap just gets more desperate. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what are some of the approaches in our current system that are failing us to get to more solutions.
I mean, wealth is not just a naturally occurring phenomenon. It doesn't just happen. Policy choices are what's gotten us here, and policy choices have helped to redirect wealth, most typically to white communities in this country at the expense of Black and brown communities. And because of the nature of wealth, wealth compounds over time and across generations. So because of these conditions and the way wealth works, the conditions that have created today's racial disparities in wealth are really in the groundwater. And what I mean by that is, like, even when we've had sort of functionally, or rather facially, race neutral policies, the wealth gap has just increased. One example that comes to mind, is the GI Bill, right, was widely credited with building the white middle class post-World War II, and its administration often excluded or provided reduced benefits to Black veterans. And so that disproportionate benefit to white families has had significant intergenerational effects. I mean, descendants of white veterans now have 32 times more wealth than the descendants of Black veterans. So that's just one way in which this often plays out through our public policies. I mean, since the 80s, you can point to the tax code and sort of the way the tax code prefers capital gains over labor income. And, there's at this point probably hundreds of examples we can point to. But the bottom line here is that, a government policy can be used to create wealth, and it has. It just hasn't worked for Black or brown families.
I think you hit it right on the head, Ahmed. And the question earlier about the role of government in all this is that when you think about the relationship that maybe you've had with government or the people you know have had with government at all levels, local, state, federal, isn't it so that if you happen to be born in poor circumstances and grow up in poor circumstances, that the government tends to do a pretty good job at managing you and your behavior through fines and fees, through work requirements. Then on the other hand, folks in a wealthier position have sort of free run to continue to accrue wealth and make choices that seem to be contrary to sort of the common well-being that should be a hallmark of our communities and our society. And relatedly, when you think about benefits that go to corporations and to business through subsidies and tax breaks, don't we think about those as investments? Like investment in business is good. And certainly there can be value, properly structured support for enterprise. But we think of investments, we think of investments more for people and money that goes to people as costs, right? And so, our premise is that if we want this economy that works for all of us, where all of us can survive, not just survive, but thrive and be happy and independent and self-directed, if we look at resources that go to people also as investments, we are the most important contributor to our economy. Shouldn't we consider money to us as we do to business as investments, as resources to help us thrive and drive not just individual well-being, but economic prosperity writ large?
I think this first conversation really setting the ground tone to like have an understanding of what the wealth gap is, affordability crisis, talking about some of these values that drive or that inform the conversation. I'm wondering, Eli, we can start getting us a little bit more into the baby bonds as a potential solution, and start that part of the conversation.
Eli, I think your description that you provided to your daughter earlier was right on. These are publicly funded trust accounts that provide seed capital to young people, particularly those who are born in poor circumstances, so they have the means to engage with wealth building activities, again, that can lead them on a journey to have an economically secure life. So that's the short of it. And this is a proposal that has gotten a lot of interest and traction in just the recent past few years, but its origin story goes back way farther than that. For example, Thomas Paine, who was in the 1790s writing about common sense and couldn't we and shouldn't we in this agrarian society provide startup capital to young people so they can lead economically independent lives. So a very similar notion to sort of the modern version of what we now call baby bonds, which really took flight after a 2010 paper by economists Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity, who proposed baby bonds as a way to close the racial wealth gap in America. And that sort of started the current conversation that has led to a federal baby bond policy proposal by United States Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, which then led to state innovation, including the state where I am now in Connecticut, to pass and fund the first baby bond policy in the country, where babies whose birth is covered by Medicaid receive a $3,200 seed funding from the state that's carefully managed and invested by the state treasurer's office. It grows with investment earnings over time to be worth more than $10,000 to $20,000 available to that young person so they can engage in wealth building activities. And since then, and I'll let Amit take it from here, there have been more than 20 states that have either introduced or considering baby bond legislation, and another 10 baby bond pilot projects that have popped up in 9 different states, red, blue, and purple, that are experimenting and innovating with what this could look like at a local level on the way towards inspiring state pickup and eventually federal legislation.
There's significant momentum around baby bonds. That's clear at the state and national level, as David has outlined. And one of the things we think is needed in order to continue this forward momentum for baby bonds, and also to better understand really the impacts it could have on people's lives, is accelerated pilot programs. And so we've launched here in Georgia a program called Freedom Futures. It's an accelerated baby bonds pilot program. You can almost think about it as a simulation of what a baby bonds type program could look like. Our program is a 4-year program serving those who are 18 to 25 years of age, who make less than 2 times the federal poverty line. And in this program, we are providing really 3 key things. One is a $40,000, quote unquote, baby bond that is reserved for wealth building purposes. The second key component is a $500 a month guaranteed income. And then the third key component is financial education. And so, the reason the baby bond amount is pegged at $40,000 is because it is closely tied to Senator Booker's proposal at the federal level, which provides closer to $50,000 to those families with the lowest amounts of income and wealth. Also, as I shared earlier, $40,000 is almost the differential between the average white and the average Black young adult when they sort of begin their wealth building journeys. And so here with our program, we're able to almost close that for the young people in our program relative to their peers. And the third reason behind the dollar amount is that it's a significant amount in order to begin building assets. It is a true capital foundation. It is almost enough to put a 10% down payment on the average home in Metro Atlanta, right? So you can do something sizable with it. The guaranteed income component is included because, as I shared at the outset, we think in order to build wealth, you do need that capital foundation. So you need that baby bond, but you also have to be able to meet your basic needs today. And so that's why we include the guaranteed income. I mean, at this point, over 100 guaranteed income programs show that it's a great way to help folks to become financially stable. And then the third component of our program is financial education. We think this is important because it's a component of many baby bond bills at the state level. We also think that that financial education, particularly financial education that is focused on advisement, is important for young people because it can help folks to really make informed decisions about how to use the capital that they're provided. And I note here, this is not about budgeting. This is not about, necessarily just working on credit scores. This is not about changing individual behavior. This is really about providing true advice, having a financial advisor. And financial advisors often only work with those who are middle and high income, like having a financial advisor work with you to really identify what are viable wealth building pathways for you. So this, in short, is our program. We have an evaluation component to this program. And this program is structured as a randomized control trial. So there is a control group as well. And this is important because while there's significant momentum around baby bonds, it is actually quite critical at this juncture to truly understand the potential impact it could have on people's lives. There is not a baby bond program at the moment that has returned learnings. And so we think this could be the first one because it's a 4-year program.
Wow. It's incredible how many different communities and states are trying this out, and the way that y'all have designed the Georgia Fund, the Freedom Fund, to really be an opportunity to learn from, how does this actually work, and how is it showing up in people's lives, and how can we make it better as we go forward? I'm curious about, we've talked about racial inequities and inequities in terms of single parents and other barriers that folks face because of their living conditions. And so I'm curious how baby bond programs address some of those barriers and some of those inequities to move everybody towards well-being and economic stability.
Baby bonds is incredibly important. It's a missing ingredient in the lives of so many folks who won't have the benefit of an inheritance or a trust account. So in a way, this sort of democratizes inheritance, but also front loads it, so you don't have to wait until later years in life so that you have access to the capital to do those wealth building activities. But in a critique perhaps of baby bonds is that as powerful as it is and as it will be, that it doesn't put food on the table today, which is an issue folks are struggling with, as we talked about earlier. It doesn't pay the light bill, doesn't get the car fixed, doesn't get the fridge fixed, all the things that happen in life. So pairing it with a direct cash support is really essential. But additionally, baby bonds works and will work best in a basket of other family-focused investments. So beyond direct cash and baby bonds, you think about, your life or the lives of your neighbors and the people you love. What are the dimensions that we think about and wrestle with on a day-to-day basis? We want quality, affordable care and education. We want to live in a safe, affordable, apartment or home if we're able to do that. We want access to affordable health care. So it's not this or that, it's all these things together that can kind of help create that economy and the security that should be a right by design, and that we should all have access to, and that we can rely on. So we don't have to sweat. Can we get through to the end of the month? We want to get more than just get by. We want to be able to get ahead. And it's this combination of investments that will allow us to do that.
Thank you for sharing that, David. And yes, you're totally right, because as we're talking about baby bonds, I'm like, where's the millennial bond? Like, hello, hold on. I still am a product of some generational I'm a generational poverty. So I'm like, where's my bond? But anyhow, as we're talking, is particularly the question earlier about some of the flaws of the current systems. I'm wondering if you both could speak to how baby bonds, beyond just the policy, what is it contributing, or what does it say in terms of the type of values, in terms of folks participating in the economy? So can you speak a little to the values that baby bonds are trying to push us to be more considerate and leaning into?
You often hear about the American dream, right? That sounds pretty cool. But American dream without resources is really hard to get there, particularly in these times. Something like baby bonds can actually help provide resources so we can achieve that American dream. It provides resources so we can actually have a stake in the economy. So we're not just sitting, observing on the sideline and wondering, why is it that, a certain very small number of folks are doing so well economically, and the rest of us are working so hard, 2 and 3 jobs, and still struggling just to get by. So this notion of freedom is also at play here. That it sounds a little bumper stickery, and we want to wave the American flag, but without resource, freedom is elusive. And economist Eric Hamilton talks about what good is it if we are able to vote if we can't afford to put food on the table? So having resources to be able to not just provide the basics, but be able to afford a fuller, healthier, happier life is really essential. And we all have a role in that. It's not just for the wealthy, but all of us can be involved in this prosperous society that we all deserve.
To put it maybe practically, or maybe they're thinking about some of the dynamics that we're seeing in the South, and particularly in Georgia. I mean, in most parts of Georgia, if you are born in the bottom 20% of the income distribution, you have like less than a 5% chance of rising to the middle class, right? So that undercuts this notion that David was talking about earlier of the American dream, and this notion of bootstrapping and the degree to which that works or not. There's only 5 counties here in Georgia where if you're born at the bottom of the income ladder, you will actually surpass the federal poverty line in adulthood. And that's just talking about the federal poverty line in adulthood. So these issues are deep and they're entrenched. We've talked about the racial component of this. In Atlanta, the racial wealth divide is 46 times. The average white family here has 46 times more wealth than the average Black family. It's basically what it was nationwide when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. And so I share all that to say that, our current solutions are not working, and baby bonds are a promising solution alongside sort of a market basket of others. But some simulations show that a federal baby bonds program could close the racial wealth divide for young people by over 50%. Which is sort of the greatest impact on racial wealth inequality out of, sort of popular policy proposals that are out there and similarly ambitious. And so, this is one reason why we are insistent that baby bonds does have to be a part of the solution, because for one intervention, it can have quite significant impact on individuals, on communities, and as David has been talking about, in really reshaping the relationship that individuals have with their government.
If we don't do something like baby bonds, the path that we're on, we will keep doing what we're doing now. And, imagine a world where we don't need diaper banks or food pantry. That sounds bonkers because that seems like so embedded in our communities, and they are so essential, and we need in the moment to do more and better of that. But it says something about our economy and our society and our values and our policy choices that those even exist in the first place. And, poverty is expensive, not just for folks who are in that circumstance, but for taxpayers and for our governments, that by not investing up front in families, we are paying for it down the road in terms of lower education outcomes, in terms of poorer health outcomes, more engagement with the justice system, all the things that are born from the accident of being born into a family or community that just didn't happen to have resources. So if we do this right and do it well, and by it I mean things like baby bonds, like the work Amit is doing, so many others around the country, we can interrupt these cycles of poverty in a way that not only will help people lead these economically independent and secure lives, achieving true freedom, but it will reduce reliance on the state, that will have downstream savings for taxpayers and all the things. So, in this moment particularly of affordability crisis, of economic precarity, the time to do this would have been 20 years ago, right? Imagine if we had done baby bonds 20 years ago, our ability to weather pandemics, to weather economic shocks, including the self-inflicted calamity that we're currently experiencing, to weather housing crises. Wouldn't young people and their families be in a much better, stronger position to weather those shocks than without? So we didn't do it 20 years ago, so let's do it now.
A few months ago, I heard there were going to be Trump accounts, that, and the headline made it sound like these were baby bonds. And I thought, what could this be? There are a lot of false solutions out there these days. People will claim that, oh, your rent is too high, and so we should deport immigrants. They'll point to a real problem, my rent is too high, and then they'll try to make the argument for a false solution. And so we're trying to lift up real solutions. Can you help us understand the difference between Trump accounts and the baby bonds programs that you all are advancing?
Yes, certainly. As part of the so-called One Beautiful Big Budget Bill that passed recently at the federal government, a plan within that is called the Trump accounts. And the Trump accounts, in short, and it does sound good on the surface, and there are often comparisons between Trump accounts and baby bonds. And as you suggest, they are not good comparisons. Trump accounts, take a good idea and co-opt it and make it bad, at least in its current form. And I'll start with a positive. One thing that is encouraging about Trump accounts is that they propose a very modest amount of public funding that would go into wealth building accounts for young people. So we're down with that. That sounds like a pretty good idea. But also, we'll slash healthcare for numbers of Americans. We'll slash food support for numbers of Americans. We'll make student loan access more difficult for many Americans. And other things that, on the net, will make it more difficult for people to achieve these economically secure lives. So I think that bigger context really matters. The Trump accounts are designed in a way that encourage and support savings behavior. And what I mean by that is, while the seed funding from the public sector is essential, as we're doing with baby bonds, the amount that the Trump accounts propose is very meager. It's $1,000 for most, but not all, babies in America. But it also allows outside contributions, upwards of $5,000 per year. So if you happen to be born into poor circumstances, you'll get your $1,000 Trump account, which sounds like a pretty good start. And you might want to do everything you can to add to that Trump account. But then you're forced into this nearly impossible situation where you'll have to make these tragic choices. By putting money into a Trump account, there's this opportunity cost. So what will I have to give up in order to do that? And it might be the food or the diapers or the other things that you need just to sort of get by. So in sum, it's really a rich get richer plan in its current form.
I would just add and say, the contrast with baby bonds is that, at least at the federal level, there's progressivity built into it. And what I mean by that is families, right, who make the least get more in contributions while everybody gets something, the program is still targeted at those who need it the most, which is why simulations show that it can significantly reduce inequality on a bunch of dimensions. And as David has shared, Trump Accounts is not designed to do that. That was not the original intent. It functions more like a savings program. But this is sort of one important distinction in how these are different.
What I'm hearing you say is that while racial inequities is at the basis of the analysis and to propose such things as baby bonds, it feels like the benefit of baby bonds transcends racial divides, because there are a lot of poor white folks in this country. It's important to acknowledge that and say that, because I think it's the first thing that people will do the moment we start talking about Black and brown disparity as the form of analysis. Be like, these are handouts for Black and brown people. And I just want to make sure that we're saying on the record that while the analysis is coming from racial inequities, which is valid and real, right? The benefit transcends that, right? Especially as we're thinking as how do these solutions get us to a place where everyone belongs. I just want to be very clear about that. Now, I know, like, we've been joking about the baby bonds, the outfits we're about to buy with this little baby bond, my need and yearning for a millennial bond. Amongst the millennials, we just call that sugar daddies and sugar mommies, but that's another conversation. What are some of the critiques and some of the concerns that have been brought up in terms of baby bond? From what have you heard on the ground, what are some of those concerns and critiques that have been brought up?
One is related to cost, in terms of like this is not nothing in terms of being able to provide these seed dollars to young people. And a response to that is, as I mentioned earlier, we're already paying for folks who are born into poverty. So we can keep doing that, or we can front load it in a way. And this is a one-time investment. So this is not an ongoing expense or investment for government. It's a one-time seed capital that with investment earnings, it becomes a more substantial sum. So the cost is a thing. I would say too, and we talked a fair bit about this, that, folks across the aisle in all parts of the country who we've had conversations with about baby bonds, feel like this is a no-brainer. Like we should be doing this like yesterday. What gives pause though from elected leaders, from stakeholders, and sometimes from families is that, again, this we're struggling today, right? And if I'm eligible for a baby bond, that means, I'm wrestling with making ends meet so I can get through the end of the month sort of thing. So again, this blending and intentional combining with other today focused investments, like direct cash, like child tax credits, like making sure that people are maximizing the benefits that they're eligible for, food assistance, all the things, affordable care and education, all that stuff has to be done in relationship with each other. So I think that's an important critique, that this is great for tomorrow, but what about today? So those are at least two for starters.
Yeah, those are the big ones. I mean, some others we hear sometimes are around, well, how do you around the uses of the funds, and so how do we know people are going to use the funds the right way? And of course, these are not questions that are asked when we have similar giveaways, if you want to frame them as giveaways to corporations or other investments made even in middle income families. But we got that question here. And baby bonds, as we've talked about, have restricted uses. They're only for wealth building purposes. So that's another one that comes up. And then probably the last one I would note is the size of the baby bond. And at the state level, they typically top off, at least if we're looking at the amount at 18, they typically top off at between $20,000 and $25,000. And so, there's sometimes questions about, well, is that 18 years from now, is that going to truly serve as a capital foundation for wealth building? And as David pointed out, we need a suite of other solutions sort of working alongside baby bonds. It's not going to be the only one or the silver bullet, especially at the state level.
So let's get into what it looks like to organize to make this happen, to make baby bonds happen in more states at greater scale, more communities. What's that looking like in Georgia? And it's so interesting that Georgia is leading in some ways, being in the South, being kind of purple state with deep inequities. How do you see that organizing unfolding? What are some of the ways that y'all are thinking about advancing the work there?
How this work is playing out in Georgia is that we have the pilot program, which is going to, yes, it's going to generate evidence, but equally importantly, it'll generate narratives and stories. We will know how young people are intending to use their baby bond. I mean, while wealth takes quite a bit of time to measure, so certainly we can't do that in 4 years, we'll at least have some indication because we'll know how folks are using their $40,000. So we'll be able to share that. We're already hearing from young folks. We've really just completed the enrollment of our 50 young people on an initial cohort, and folks are already starting to feel that a little bit of relief, a little bit of I can breathe. There are new possibilities that are opened up for me. I already have dreams and aspirations. The limiting factor was really just capital. I already have a business, but now I can scale it. So we're already hearing these things from young people about the potential impacts that it may have, and it's starting to have on people's lives. On the policy side, this pilot is critically important because it does generate those learnings. It generates critical evidence. We are also putting together a coalition of other partners, those that are involved in economic justice, yes, but also those who understand the connection between health and wealth, who understand, maybe who are helping folks to buy homes, maybe the Realtors Association, your chambers of commerces of the world, others that are involved in helping communities in some way to address wealth inequality. And so we want to get at this. And, David, I'm sure you can share from other states as well, that it takes a broad coalition of partners to get baby bonds done. And a part of our strategy will be, of course, to engage Republicans and moderates and conservatives, because the way certainly the politics of this works is you can't pass a baby bonds bill in Georgia and really in the South without buy-in from Republicans and moderates. And we're optimistic. We're optimistic because, as David shared earlier, there is growing bipartisan consensus around, the need for early childhood investments. Something like a Trump account, while it's not designed in a way that can reduce inequality, it does still signal that both Democrats and Republicans are still interested in the concept. And we're seeing growing momentum for baby bonds legislation across this purple and also red states. So we're optimistic about our ability to get that done here too.
I think Amit's right on in terms of the broad collaboration. This is such a big tent idea. And what was helpful and essential to victory here in Connecticut was that it wasn't just the state treasurer, who was a key, also unusual champion for this policy, and not just the typical advocates, children's supporters and so forth. There's certainly them, but include labor, faith community, chambers of commerce, mayors, both Democratic and Republican, hospital community, banks and financial sector. And as I name those, that's an incomplete just starter list. You could imagine each of them having a different self-interest and why baby bonds would be important for them. And that's okay. I mean, it doesn't have to be a shared uniform way to talk about it or a way into the policy across those different sectors. But what was so compelling to the legislature and eventually the governor, and the momentum that we're seeing in other states, is that it is such broad appeal for different reasons, for different actors, including those who might not typically be involved with what on the surface might be a policy that supports young people. But it's really, I think the momentum is driven by this broad belief in the American dream, and that the way to get there is to resource it in a way that we haven't done historically.
The thing that we often note to other partners is that baby bonds can accelerate existing interventions, the effectiveness of existing interventions. So if you're, let's say, either the Realtors Association, who cares about people buying homes, or even you're involved in getting folks into homeownership through other means, a baby bonds fills a critical need. It's that down payment. It reduces the debt to income ratio. It's sort of that gap that sort of other programs may not fill. I mean, if you care about entrepreneurship, similarly, this is seed capital. which is often not provided even by CDFIs or others, right, in that capital ecosystem. So it fills the gap there. And you can kind of look at other interventions and sort of say the same thing about baby bonds. So this is one reason I think why it does have appeal, across sort of this, across sectors rather.
I have two more quick things. You've engaged us in the strategy session here on how we're going to get continued traction across the country. Is that this is a powerful economic development opportunity. So yes, it does invest in the person and in the family, but where do people and families live? They live in communities. They live in a place. So you can imagine, because poverty tends to concentrate, that a cohort of young people who are eligible for baby bonds will receive this distribution that then gets redeployed in community for home ownership and all the supporting expenses that go with that, for investing in small business or starting do small business. So these are dollars that start small, grow with time and interest, and then are redeployed in a really powerful way in places. And the second note on why this is such a powerful idea is that, yes, providing young people with money is going to make a demonstrable difference in their lives. That seems pretty straightforward. But it was also compelling, and we're involved with a research project here in Connecticut with Yale, is to understand what are those early years effects of just knowing that your young person will be the beneficiary of a baby bond in the out years. And we believe, and there's some compelling directional research that shows, for example, child savings accounts, we think it'll be more powerful with baby bonds, that there will be benefit to maternal health in the nearer term, as Amit mentioned, that just knowing you have this will be a bit of a relief for you, and knowing that your young person will be having access to these means, that we think it can reduce stress and anxiety, because those are things that are linked strongly with being in a poor circumstance, and not having to sweat as much, being able to breathe, as Amit said. We also think that it'll change one's look to the future, might lead to more future planning, might lead to more hopefulness, more optimism, and could also, importantly, in the early years, change one's relationship with government, who we don't trust for the most part. Like, think when you get something in the mail that's from the state or the federal government, hey, I don't know about you, but it gives me shivers. And it's not always a bad thing, but we're conditioned to think that government is out to sort of get us. Imagine living in a world where government isn't out to get us, but it sees us, believes us, invests in us in a way that we can trust in the promise of resource that puts us on an economically secure path. So this notion that there are other non-economic benefits, we think is also really powerful and compelling.
What's the main thing you would like people to take away from this conversation? What do you want them to remember about baby bonds?
One is that we get to choose. Like, again, this economy, we have designed this, so we can design it, redesign it, refresh it in a way that actually works for all of us. So, baby bonds is a choice that we can make within a larger set of choices to bring about this economy that works for all. So that's one. The second one is, I think that we have a history, and we are conditioned to create programs and services which we really need to support families. But for the generations that we've had programs and services across the board, if it's healthcare, childcare, et cetera, we still have a lot of folks born into poverty, into poor circumstances. So while we still need quality, scalable programs and services, those will not and have not been enough to escape the stickiness of poverty. It will take investing in wealth and capital that can sort of change that dynamic. So was a shorter, pithier way to say that. So we can't income and save or do the right things to get our way out of poverty. It's got to be investments like baby bonds to get us there in a durable, lasting way.
I might also similarly offer two things. One is that this is doable. We can get this done. I mean, states are demonstrating that baby bonds is possible, regardless of if you're in a blue or red or purple state. This is doable, and it's important both because of the scale of the problem, as we've already talked about, and also because the antidote to bad policy at the federal level has to be good policy at the local and the state level, and baby bonds is a part of that solution. So that's the first thing that I would share. And second is that policy choices are what's gotten us here. Policy has created these conditions of deep and persistent poverty that disproportionately impacts Black and brown communities, disproportionately impacts young people, disproportionately impacts poor people. Policy is going to get us out. And baby bonds and this broader notion of economic rights, this idea that we all deserve to live in a world where we are free from financial precarity, where we have the capital foundation to make sort of self-determined decisions about what our future looks like. We all deserve that. And baby bonds is a part of that solution.
Well, thank you all so much for that conversation. With that, I feel like we're arriving to the end. I have hopes, but I'm still going to hold on to my millennial bond. Listen, I want one. I am looking for one. I need it. I'm like, I mean, low key, that's a real question, because like, what do you do with queer folks who aren't going to have children? But, or I mean, those of us who don't want children. But anyhow, I appreciate you coming on today, and thank you so much. I feel like I definitely have more of an understanding on baby bonds, and I hope our listeners out there also can tune in more into the conversation and, you know, organize or find out what the local folks are doing on the ground to see if baby bonds is something, you know, possible in your community. So thank you all so much for being a part of this podcast. Well, thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Real Solutions. Again, a podcast where we bring in real lived experience and policy solutions to build a world where everyone belongs. Make sure you tune in every week for the next couple of weeks to get a new episode, a new policy, and a new real solution.